Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Pudge's Ring Reviews as we delve into episode 3 of the Mr. McMahon docuseries on Netflix. This episode is entitled Screwjob. So, if you're a wrestling fan, you're already like, here we go again. But I think that the non-wrestling fan, there's better documentaries about the Screwjob, I think, out there that you could watch. But it definitely would be an interesting subject for non-wrestling fans. So with the cold open, actually, they talk about the original Screwjob, which not everyone knows about. It involves Wendy Richter, who we talked about in episode 1. Was it 1 or 2? Where she kind of hooked up with Cyndi Lauper, and they were the female part of the Rock and Wrestling Connection. She was definitely the biggest female wrestling star at the time. But Vince wanted her to drop the title, and she did not want to drop the title. And they didn't talk about that. She also wanted more money. She said that she wasn't getting paid good. She was only getting paid what by what like underneath talent was making on the man side, and she felt like she was deserving of more money. And you could sit there and say no, but at the time she was the biggest female star. I mean, she definitely probably was deserving of more money. I think Cyndi Lauper had a lot to play into her being a big star, but anyway, Vince didn't want to pay her, so Vince told her she was going to drop the title. She said no. He said, look, you're following a script, and it's my title. And he then said, if she wasn't going to lose or give it up, I was going to make her give it up. So he said, my father told me always get the match in the ring and then figure it out. And sometime during the match, he said to the ref, sometime during the match, she's going to be rolled up, count to 3. So at some point in the match, and also she was wrestling against the Spider Lady. Now this part I'm not certain of, because it was obvious that it was Fabulous Moolah. Now the Spider Lady was just a masked gimmick, but it's weird because it's like, obviously you're working Moolah. Now did she think that she was just working Moolah? Moolah was just doing this throwaway gimmick for the night, or was, she said, I don't know, I know Moolah was there, but she wasn't booked that night. I just don't understand that part of it. Like, why would Wendy Richter not be smart enough for that? But at one point she did get rolled up, and the ref counted 1, and she said she got her shoulder up at 1, and the ref just kept counting. And Spider Lady won, and then you see them scuffling and stuff, and kind of going at it, and Moolah ends up leaving, and Wendy Richter just stands there in the ring with the belt, throws it down, and leaves. And Vince said that when she went in the back, that was the last time he saw Wendy Richter, and he didn't care. She said that's not fair, and he said, life's not fair. And he also then says, there's nothing I wouldn't do for the business. And then they have the intro. And now we're back to the story where we left off last episode, where Hogan's about to testify. They've built it up. Hogan's going to testify against Vince. What's he going to say? Hogan told the government, like, he sat there and listened to everything they wanted him to say, and he said, oh, yeah, brother, I'll say it all. And he said the whole time he knew what he was going to say. He was never going to go against Vince McMahon. He said he was gonna tell the truth, and Hogan said that when he saw Vince, he said, "Remember, Vince, we came up together, we go down together." And Vince said he was nervous when so they thought Hogan was gonna be this big star witness for them, and in turn he ends up helping out Vince. And this was at a time when Hogan and Vince weren't seeing eye to eye, too. So Vince had said he was really nervous before, they're going to come in with the ruling. And it's like your whole life is right there in the balance. So, yeah, he was definitely nervous, and they read the verdict and was found not guilty. Now, Meltzer comes on and says, the case should have never went to court anyway. They didn't have any evidence against Vince, and it just, it was a witch hunt. And Linda McMahon came on saying, look, now there's proof that our company, we don't have a steroid problem, and, Vince is a good guy, and Meltzer immediately comes on and says, no, you still have a steroid problem in your company, and just because Vince was found not guilty doesn't mean he's a good guy. It just means he's not guilty of what they were accusing him of. So, then some things start to come out, about him. Yeah, he's such a good guy, but there were reports of them contacting witnesses, jury tampering, trying to pay off witnesses. So, that's really a good guy. And the trial definitely affected the business financially. The business was struggling at the time for WWF. They financially, I know, listen to Pritchard talk. He talked about they were taking water coolers out of the WWF headquarters, and they were renegotiating people's contracts, and it really took a hit on their business. They started doing smaller venues. You would see WWF at high school gyms. So it was crazy. Yeah, they weren't having the big sellouts anymore. They start talking about who is now going to replace Hogan. Now that Hogan's gone, we need that big babyface star. Who's it going to be? And Vince thought Lex Luger would be the guy. And this is when they start to push Lex Luger as Made in America, Made in the USA Lex Luger. Lex Luger has $1 million body, but his charisma is very, very lacking, and his people skills is also very lacking. And Vince said Lex was okay, but he was nowhere near Hogan, and that ultimately didn't work out. They tried Lex. I think step one is you turned him babyface from a heel. There was never any net organic buildup. You just turned him. You manufactured it. So the crowd got behind him, but it wasn't like the wave was coming and everyone was jumping on the wave. The wave was there, and everyone had to either jump in or get out of the way, Also, they build him up to this big match against Yokozuna, again, the foreign heel, and he wins the match by count out and then celebrates like he won the championship. He celebrates like he won the championship, and it just was like a buffoonery or buffoonish. He looked like a fool. So how are you going to get behind someone that looks like an idiot? So, in comes the next person who says Bret Hart was the guy to pull the sword out of the stone, so to speak, and be the hero. And that guy that said that was Bret Hart. So, there's no bigger fan than Bret Hart, of Bret Hart. But Bret Hart was right. He was the guy that everyone really was behind at the time. Everyone was really into Bret Hart. And they start talking about the new generation. And the main stars of the new generation were Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, Undertaker. They were probably the 5 main stars of that time. And Bret said he was the safest guy to put the title on because he's not going to get in trouble with drugs or underage girls or, any type of scandal. He's pretty wholesome. He was a family guy. He would come to the shows with his kid and stuff like that. And the problem with Bret, and Vince says, he didn't have much charisma. He had enough, but not to the amount that he would really want. Bret was a Canadian, and not to sound derogatory, but Canadians are just a different breed. They all seem kind of laid back, So now they start talking about around this time is the time Turner was just opening, they always say this, Turner was just opening the checkbook and letting these guys do whatever they wanted, which, yeah, it's true to a point. Like, they were getting much better contract. They were actually getting contracts in WCW, and they were getting better deals. But is that wrong? I mean, that's the way he chose to do it. So, I mean, Turner wanted to compete. He wanted to compete against Vince. Just like Vince, when he took over, wanted to compete against anyone else. After Hogan and Randy Savage went over, and sorry, as I said, I'm kind of under the weather. They don't talk about the rumors of Savage. It was always a big thing of why was Savage the one guy who left and never could come back. And there were rumors that, later on there's rumors of Savage and Stephanie McMahon having a relationship. And I don't know, at the time Stephanie would have been way underage. That's never been addressed. You can never say never, but Lenny Poffo once said one of the big reasons why Vince was so upset with Randy was when Randy left, he took the Slim Jim advertisement with him, and Bischoff has talked about, I got Randy Savage for free, because with Randy Savage came Slim Jim. So that is how much is true. And he says when he came, he brought Slim Jim with him, and Randy Savage got paid the exact amount the Slim Jim company paid WCW for their advertising. So he said, yeah, Randy Savage was free. I do remember there was a Raw where Vince McMahon does talk about like Macho Man leaving, and he was really he only did that for him. He didn't do that for anyone else. So that was always interesting. Then Bischoff comes on and tells the same old story that he tells in any other documentary. Turner calls him up to his office and says, "Eric, how are we gonna?" He always does the imitation of Turner, like, "Eric, how are we gonna compete against Vince McMahon?" And Bischoff talks about, hey, they're on Monday night prime time. We're on at Saturday night at 6:05. We can't compete against that. If you want to compete, give me some prime time hours. And he, and then the part that always is like, to me, is always like, he says, Turner says, all right, give Eric 2 hours every Monday night on TNT. That's not true. Monday Night Nitro was only 1 hour originally. I mean, I know they did do the replay after, so maybe that's the case. Like, we'll do the 1 hour and then we'll put a 1 hour replay on. But it was only 1 hour originally. So when he always says give him 2 hours, it's like, yeah, it became 2 hours, but it wasn't originally. And Raw was only an hour at the time as well. Raw became 2 hours because Nitro became 2 hours. So I just don't understand that narrative, that story. There's that word again, narrative. You'll hear it more in this episode. Anyway, yeah, they said Turner just wanted to really compete against Vince, and Vince did not like that. He would go on record saying things like, you could put a TV show on at any time on your network. Why would you pick the exact time to oppose us? Because he wanted to hurt us. And he's like, no, he just wanted to go directly against you because he wanted to compete. That's what Turner wanted to do. He's a competitor, man. He's a businessman, and hey, he's got the same business as you. He wants to see if he can make it better. And again, with Vince saying there's nothing wrong with that. Well, now it's funny because there's something wrong with it when it's WCW doing it to him. So, as soon as they talk about when they want to, they're competing now, they talk about Lex Luger again, which, again, Vince wanted to make him his big star. Well, it's funny because Lex Luger ended up, his contract had expired. He was working without a contract in WWF. He worked a Sunday night for WWF and showed up Monday on the first Monday Nitro. A total surprise. No one knew it. They said that he didn't tell anyone. No one knew that he was going to show up. WWF thought he was going to re-sign with them. And Pritchard said that it was embarrassing that happened, and it pissed off. He was pissed about it. Vince was pissed about it. Vince talked about how he felt slighted, that, you know, he would make these talents and then they'd leave and go to WCW. Well, just imagine how all the other promoters felt when they would make guys stars in their territories and then they'd go to WWF and he'd capitalize on it. I mean, with the biggest name of all time, Hogan. Vince didn't make Hulkamania. Hulkamania was, I'm not going to say Vern Gagne made Hulkamania, but Hulkamania was made during his run in the AWA. It just took over in his WWF run. So Eric starts talking about making a list of how can he be different. Now this is what I said, this is all right. So I'll say he starts talking about making a list of every way he could be different from WWF, such as like, hey, they're a taped show, so let's do live every week. Hey, they got the money to do it, let's do it. Their characters are more childish, they're more character driven. We want to be more reality based. We'll have more reality storylines. And I heard I can't remember who told me this. I think it might have been Bobby Heenan. And he said, hey, if you want to open up a car dealership and the guy across the street is already there selling Cadillacs, well, don't go and sell Cadillacs. Go sell motorcycles. Be something completely different. And that's kind of what Eric Bischoff did. Which, then it's interesting because Vince said all they were doing was using WWF ideas. But they were using characters from WWF or people. But they were doing their own thing. For the most part, there were definitely some things that carried over from WWF. But how could you not? It was the biggest company ever, in wrestling. Bischoff said that Vince wanted, like, wrestling to be known as, WWF, such as, like, a tissue. When someone says, get me a tissue, a lot of times they'll say, get me a Kleenex. Well, Kleenex is the name of a brand, not the actual item. Or, the same thing goes with, like, a Band-Aid. Band-Aid isn't what it's called. Band-Aid is the name of a brand. You don't even call it what the name of the actual item is. You just say a Band-Aid. And that's what Vince wanted with WWF. And now there's something else out there to stop that. So Eric started doing things like putting the results, since they were taped, Raw was taped, and Nitro was live, he started doing things like putting results on the TV show and letting people know what happened. And Vince was like, oh, that's dirty pool, and Eric knew that if he upset the WWF audience, that they would tune in to see what he would do the next week. And that's kind of like what, if you ever saw the Howard Stern movie, they talked about, like, his ratings. And it's like, how can he have these ratings? All these people said they hate him. And they would talk about, well, the people that hate him the most are the people that listen to him the most. And they're like, how can that be? Then the answer is they want to hear what he says next. And that's kind of what Bischoff, everyone wanted to see, what's he going to do next? And Vince and Pritchard both talk about how those little digs really pissed him off. And so the thing is, like, everyone said, when it came to this stuff, Vince would never sell his aggravation or his frustration. He would never sell how mad he was. And that's what everyone says about Vince, period. You never sell your emotions. Never sell it, which probably is why this guy has many problems in life. They really quickly just glossed over Medusa going to WCW and dropping the title in the trash. Again, that was a pretty big moment at the time. She ended up not, like, she should have joined the NWO and been they could have had a female member. I mean, she totally would have fit. It was around that time. It would have made total sense, but they didn't. And she went there, and she really didn't do much of anything, but just that initial shock of her showing up with the WWF Women's title and dropping it in the trash was something to see. They really don't talk about it. They just kind of show the clip of it. But Eric said, well, I finally did get Vince to react. He doesn't show his emotions, but I finally did get him to react when he started with the Billionaire Ted skits. And so they actually show, in a couple in the Monday Night Wars documentary or docuseries on the network, they show this like little interview with Ted Turner, this shoot interview with Ted Turner, where he's sitting in this white room in front of these doors. I would love to see that whole interview, because that would be fascinating to me. That's someone that you never hear about talking about the wrestling. Number one, because he's not really, I know he owned it, but he wasn't really in the business. But I would love to see that whole interview. But they do show that, Vince starts making the Billionaire Ted skits with the Huckster and the Nacho Man and Scheme Gene. And they show Ted Turner watching it, laughing. And Bischoff said, Bischoff has always said, Ted saw him, he loved them, he thought they were hilarious. And they actually show him watching them and laughing. So, Vince, again, another thing I got to comment on watching this again, Vince's lips look disgusting. I got to mention that. And I can't remember the woman's name, but the woman that was working for USA Network, they finally made WWF put a stop to these Billionaire Ted skits, because they said, hey, look, we are in business against Turner, but we're friends. We're not going to take personal jabs at him. So it's funny that they don't understand the wrestling business. Like, I'm not saying it in a derogatory way about them, but I'm saying, like, Vince doesn't care, So they ended up stopped doing them. But this part I'm not sure about. Pritchard, when they're talking about the Billionaire Ted skits, is when Pritchard said, that's how I knew Razor, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash were going to go to WCW, because we wanted them in the skits, and they both declined. So I knew that they were going there. I don't know if I believe that. I don't really know, because it's been said that, Scott Hall and Razor both had met with Vince, and Scott said, look, they're offering me this. Can you match that? And Vince said no, and both of them left. It had been said that Kevin Nash said, oh, I'm going to stay here, and then he ended up going anyway. Vince said, though, hey, that's a business decision, and I don't fault them for that. So it's interesting that he doesn't feel the same way about them leaving as Hogan. Maybe because Diesel was his heavyweight champion for a while, though. But it's been said that he was always the lowest drawing champion of all time. And Razor Ramon was a big star. He was the top of the B level. I would say he was A level, but he just never had a run with the title or anything. So, as they talk about that, now we enter the Clique. And if you don't know, this would be also another fascinating story for people that aren't in the know. But for us, it's like, this episode is really redundant, It's during one of the biggest times in wrestling, so everything is really redundant and kind of just on repeat here. They talk about the Clique and the night of the curtain call. It was Scott Hall as Razor Ramon and Kevin Nash as Diesel's last night in the company. They were doing a Madison Square Garden show. I believe Diesel and Shawn worked, and Razor and Hunter worked, and then they had a cage match, and after the match, all four of them came in the ring, and they just were like hugging and holding up each other's hands and stuff, and the crowd was like going crazy because this wasn't done, and someone in the crowd recorded it. And interestingly, the Clique also involved Sean Waltman, X-Pac, 1, 2, 3 Kid, six-pack, whatever you want to call him. And they never mentioned Justin Credible. Justin Credible was always said to be part of the clique. Maybe because he's not a big name and he has a lot of issues, but they never mentioned him. And Louis Spicolli, I thought, was always kind of like a somewhat of a member as well. But anyway, the curtain call was this big thing that wasn't, it was something that wasn't done, because they get into this whole issue of the word kayfabe, and everyone's kayfabe, and then the person that they have to explain kayfabe is the woman who I had said in the previous episode I don't even know why she's on this docuseries. So of all the people, they could have had a wrestler explain it. No, they had her explain it. And they talk about how the curtain call was the day kayfabe died. And all the old timers were like, oh my God, this is going to kill the business. Meanwhile, all the younger people, you had Stephanie McMahon, Cody Rhodes saying how cool this was. And the thing is that I'm in the middle. The way the world is today, there can't be kayfabe. The problem with, I think, today and compared to back in the day when it comes to wrestling is everything. You can find out everything. And there is no kayfabe at all. And so it's like, back in the day, I could hate someone like, say, Greg the Hammer Valentine. And I don't know anything about him. I just know I see him as a bad guy on TV, and that's it. Nowadays, it's like, okay, I hate Kevin Owens. He's such a bad guy. And then you see his Twitter page, and you see like him at Disneyland with his autistic son, and it's like, well, no, how can I hate this guy? He's doing these awesome things for his autistic son, or maybe like, say, Braun Strowman and Shinsuke. I'm just picking names at random. Braun Strowman and Shinsuke Nakamura are in a blood feud with each other, and then on Twitter, oh, look at it, there's Braun Strowman and Shinsuke Nakamura together at Disneyland. I remember Jim Cornette telling this story, and he was talking about he was at an amusement park, and he was in line to ride the flume, the log ride that goes down the waterfall. And he was towards the front of the line, and the Rock and Roll Express were in the line towards the back, and he saw him, and he was cussing them out, because he's like, I can't just sit here while they're there. He said while he was on the ride, I'm not gonna swear on this show, but he was cursing them out and stuff like that. He goes, he rides the ride, he gets off the ride, they're still in line, he's cursing them out. Keeping kayfabe alive, and that's what they did back then. You wouldn't see the bad guys with the good guys showing up in cars or at hotels. They would stay at different hotels. They would eat at different restaurants. It just was that's how it was. It wasn't done. It wasn't done the way it is now, where now it's like it doesn't matter. They'll show up together, and it's just a different time. So they said that the curtain call was basically the thing that killed it. And I could see that point, Undertaker talked about how he wasn't there that night, but had he been there, he would have been totally pissed off. Bret Hart was mad about it, said it pulled the curtain back. And then they talk about, with The Undertaker, when he talks about kayfabe, he was talking about how much, I think, honestly, if anyone of the last 30 years protected kayfabe more than The Undertaker, you'd have to tell me, because this guy, he protected that character. He wouldn't even do any TV interviews and stuff, like all these documentaries. He didn't do them until much to like right when he was about to retire, when he really wasn't playing the dead man character anymore. He did he did do some stuff when he was the American Badass in the early 2000s, but he was playing a different character then. When he was the dead man Undertaker, he really didn't, he protected that character. I know, like, when they did the Beyond the Mat documentary, there was a story of he went up to the director and said, "Hey, make sure I'm not in any of your shots, because not that I don't want to mess up your documentary, but I've made a lot of money doing this character, and people believe in this character, and I don't want it to, mess it up." So very protective of the character. So now they talk about Vince saying like, "Hey, maybe I was duped into this curtain call thing." And what it was Vince agreed to it, and then there was a lot of backlash, so now he has to come down on them. And you can't punish Scott Hall and Kevin Nash because they're gone. Shawn Michaels is your champion, so Triple H was the one that got punished. And that'll be more towards the next episode. You'll hear about that. So Bischoff said that around this time, he had been thinking of a storyline involving some outsiders, but he couldn't figure out who would be the right talent for it. And Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, with them becoming available at the same time, they fit what his story was going to be. And his story was going to be, guys coming from WWF and kind of invading. And so they started doing that, the outsider storyline, and it was working. And Eric says it was working so good, Vince sued WCW for trying to use their intellectual property, saying Scott Hall was doing the Razor Ramon character and Kevin Nash was basically doing the Diesel character. But if you look back at some Scott Hall when he was the Diamond Stud before he went to WWF, he was doing the Razor Ramon character. I mean, he came out with the toothpick. I mean, he had the look. So, yeah, I mean, he definitely was portraying Razor Ramon, but also he had been doing the Diamonds. He had been doing it before Razor Ramon. But when he jumped that rail, I mean, you didn't say, "Oh, it's Scott Hall." You were like, "Oh, it's Razor Ramon." And I thought it was legit when I first saw it. I remember clicking over to Raw, going, "Oh, they're going to talk about it." And then I'm clicking over the next week, and I'm like, they haven't talked about it at all. And I was wondering why WWF wasn't talking about sending Razor Ramon over to WCW. I was 16 at the time, so yeah, I believed it. It worked really good. I mean, I think having him come from the crowd and stuff like that had he come from the backstage area, I don't think it would have worked as well. So this led to Vince reacting. They haven't. I think it's going to be in the next episode, but they do the fake Razor and Diesel, and I don't even know if they talk about it in the next episode actually, but they end up doing the fake Razor and Diesel, and that does not get over well. And they say, "Hey, well, we own the Diesel and Razor character, so we're going to have two guys portray Razor and Diesel." The crowd hated it. And the guy that played Razor was Rick Bogner. Wasn't a bad talent, but you're slotted in that position. They said Scott Hall actually contacted him and asked him if he wanted to buy his gear. And the guy that played Diesel was Glenn Jacobs, who went on to be Kane. He was Isaac Yankem. So he stuck around forever. And Bischoff says, Vince always said Ted Turner is against me. He never would bring up Eric Bischoff because who knows Eric Bischoff? Everyone knows Ted Turner. Plus, Vince could be the sympathetic babyface with Ted Turner. Ted Turner's this big billionaire, and I'm just little old Vince McMahon. Yet Vince McMahon was a rich guy too. And they ask Vince about him being raided, because he brought up the term raided. They raided us. And they said, "Yeah, but Vince, didn't you raid everyone else?" And everyone says that, Vince, this is Vince's MO. He raided everyone else's territories. So, it's exactly what he did in 1985. And Bischoff likes to say, one person's raid is another person's acquisition. But, I'm glad that they actually asked Vince about Ted Turner and his, as Vince said, predatory enterprise. And Vince said, I have no problem with competition, but they were trying to hurt us and put things out like the results and stuff like that and take away our talent. And they ask him about, isn't that what you did? And he would say, like, no, it's not what I did. I wasn't trying to hurt the competition. I wasn't doing stuff. I just wanted to compete. And it's like, dude, you did do that stuff. You would take, I think I talked about this, you would take a talent, you would take some talents from other territories and then run shows. He would also run opposition. Sorry. Like, if NWA was doing or WCW NWA was doing a pay-per-view, he put the Royal Rumble on free TV. They started doing things like that. And Vince said, sometimes what he says isn't always what he thinks, and you got to put it out there to control thought process. And kind of what I took that to mean is, he's going to go out and say, yeah, I didn't do the same thing. They're doing it to me, to control the thought of that he's the victim here, and that's how he's going to portray himself, and that's how he's going to be, and kind of to control the narrative out there to the public. And that's kind of how I took that. And the outsider angle, going back to the outsiders, Bischoff, it's funny because I never heard it explained like this. He said the outsider angle was just the angle to lead up to the NWO. I would view it all as one, but that was pretty interesting for me to hear him say, yeah, well, the outsider angle, that was to build up to the NWO angle. And the outsider angle was great, but really where WCW was set on fire, white heat, set on fire with white heat, was the Bash at the Beach, 96, when Hogan came out and it was revealed he was going to be the third guy to help Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And then we get into a little bit of the narrative of, they've always said no one knew Hogan was going to do it. They pitched it and they didn't know until that night. It's, again, you're talking about the biggest night in this company's history, with Hogan coming out. This is the biggest thing they've ever done at this point. And they're going to not know? Like, Hogan's going to come to the ring and they're not going to know if he's going to drop the leg on Macho Man? Come on. It was said that Hogan called Bischoff basically and said, hey, who's the third guy? And they were saying Sting. And he was like, no, you're talking to the third guy. Nash was always like, yeah, Hogan's not going to let that money train leave the station without him on it. And Kevin Sullivan even talked about, like, I kept him at my house the night before so that no one would persuade him to not do it. Because Hogan did have a lot riding on it. This goes to, like, the John Cena argument where a lot of people were like, just turn him heel. Same thing could be said for Hogan. Like, people didn't understand how much was involved in that. I mean, these guys do so much for charity, and it's not even just the merchandise and stuff. There's so much involved with these guys being these huge baby faces that Cena couldn't turn heel. He's done more Make-A-Wishes than anyone ever. And people, the wrestling fan is just like, turn him heel. There's so much that has to be put into that, so much thought, and not just for the character, but for this guy's personal life and business. And so Hogan did come out and drop the leg on Macho Man, and he said that the promo he cut was kind of just, hey, I just went out there and it was off the hip. And I could believe that. I think, he definitely probably had a couple bullet points, but I could believe that it wasn't totally scripted. That's not how these guys work. I don't work that way where you script out a whole promo. I don't like it. It doesn't feel right. And that's not how older guys work. They didn't sit there in the back and write out their whole promo, and they talked about just like Vince missed out. Vince could have turned him heel. And the thing is, like, Hogan has said he came up to Vince with the Hollywood Hogan idea after the Warrior. I don't know. I don't know. Vince has never said that. Hogan has said it. Hogan tells a lot of tall tales. But they talked about like how the fans were throwing all the garbage in the ring, and I can't remember who said it, but someone said every piece of trash in that ring was like a piece of gold, and they knew they had the crowd. They knew they had something here with the crowd turning like that. Hogan said like this. He knew this is either going to be the greatest thing for my career, or it's going to kill my career. And definitely, I don't know if it was the greatest thing for his career. It was the greatest thing for his career at the time. It definitely revived him. I had no interest in Hogan. It was something that was needed. I want to real quick talk about it. It's not in a documentary, but I want to real quick mention Bobby Heenan that night, because there's been a lot of talk about, did Bobby Heenan ruin it? Because when Hogan came out, oh, Hogan's here, all right, let's go get him, boys. And Bobby Heenan says, yeah, but whose side is he on? Now, look, people looking back at it now can go, oh man, he just basically said, he put the thought in your mind that he might turn. Now, me, even at that time, I never thought that, because Bobby Heenan was always against Hogan. Never liked him. Even when Hogan turned heel, Bobby Heenan wasn't for him. So I don't believe that it did. I thought it was just Bobby Heenan being Bobby Heenan. So I'd be interested in other people saying, no, I think he ruined it. I don't think anyone watching when Bobby Heenan said that, I honestly don't think really hardly anyone watching was going, oh yeah, you're right. He could turn on the Macho Man. I don't think anyone thought that. Vince actually gave credit to Hogan, saying that he did such a great job turning heel. And Hogan comes on and talks about like, yeah, well, this wasn't my first rodeo as a bad guy. Remember, I was a bad guy before I was in the WWF, or my first run in WWF back in the day. So, it wasn't his first run as a heel. Then they start showing some highlights from the NWO and talking about how big the NWO got, and how NWO actually was a bigger brand than WCW was. And then Bischoff comes on and talks about 83 weeks. And I'm not going to knock it here in 83 weeks. Sorry. Bischoff can take this 83 weeks and he's going to ride it for the rest of his life. 83 weeks is significant because that's how many weeks Nitro started beating Raw. It beat it 83 weeks in a row in the ratings. And they've, here we are almost 30 years later and you still hear about it. And that's Bischoff's claim to fame. So, hey, keep going with it. He talks about how the idea came about that Bischoff would be a character in the NWO. It made sense. I think that once Bischoff joined NWO, it totally took Ted DiBiase's character and made him basically obsolete. But Bischoff, it became a character in the NWO. You'll hear more about that, I think, in the next episode. And they asked Vince if he remembers the first time he remembers hearing about Bischoff, and he talks about, I guess he came trying to get a job with us, and they show Bischoff trying to get the job with WWF, and it's a clip now you can watch on the internet and stuff on YouTube, where they're like, here, Vince, sell me this broom, and it's like, oh, this broom is great. You can sweep with it, and this and that. And they asked him who his hero was, and he said Hulk Hogan. And when you talk about the selling thing, I think it's the Wolves of Wall Street, where Leonardo DiCaprio is like, sell me this pen, and John Bernthal is, one guy's like, this pen's good, it writes, and this pen is, blue, and then John Bernthal is like, hey, oh, thanks for this thing. Hey, do me a favor, write your name down for me. And Leonardo's like, I can't have a pen. And he holds it up. He's like, what if you bought this one? And and it makes me think, man, what if Bischoff at the time totally was like, oh, like, sell me this broom. And Bischoff is like talking, right? Not even talking about the broom. Monday night on this and that, and then, oh, I see. Oh, excuse me, Mr. McMahon, you have a you just dropped your chips all over there. You mind sweeping that up? What if you had this broom? I wonder if he could pull that off. So they asked Vince if he regrets not hiring Bischoff, and he says, I don't regret anything in my life. Vince basically starts talking about WWE creations were what was making WCW a big deal, and wasn't really giving them any credit at all. I mean, they still had to do the work. They had the characters. They still had to do the work, And he said he started to panic. Vince started to panic, so he didn't want to lose Bret Hart, and so he signed Bret to a 20-year contract. And probably a year or so into it, he realized this wasn't a great decision. And he was being told what a bad business move it was, and that he wasn't going to have the money for it. And so he called up Bret, and there's a whole documentary on this, Wrestling with Shadows. Maybe we'll get into it. I don't know. It's not the best documentary. It's good, but it's boring. But it gets good around the Screwjob time. So anyway, again, if you want to really watch a documentary on the Screwjob, that's probably one to go to. Anyway, they said that Vince Shane said, but my father was showing him the loopholes to get out of the contract. And it's been said Vince tried to help him get a contract from WCW that was already offered to him. And all Vince wanted in return was for him to drop the belt. So now we're hitting Survivor Series time, and Vince wanted Bret to drop the belt to Shawn, and Bret says that he had a little meeting with Shawn and said, I would, totally take care of you anytime we're in the ring, and, I'll, do the right thing for you. And he claims that Shawn said, well, yeah, I can't say the same for you, which is such a stupid thing to say. Like, Shawn Michaels comes on and says, look, I was a prick back then. So, because of that, Bret was like, no, I would never drop the belt to Shawn. And then it became, well, why don't we have you drop the belt to so-and-so? No, well, not in Canada. And then, well, not in Michigan, because that's right near Canada. So, it kept coming up with all these different reasons. I know Cornette once said, look, just have Shamrock go in and kick his ass and take the belt. But Shamrock was a Bret Hart guy, so I don't know if that would have happened. So they talk about how there was a phone call, and on that phone call was Shawn, Triple H, and Vince. And Triple H said, hey, if he's not going to do business, we'll make him do business. And then the idea for the Screwjob came up. Ironically, it was through Bret's own idea of Shawn putting the sharpshooter on him, which Bret ripped Shawn apart. If you notice, he didn't put it on the right way. He's always going to pick Shawn apart. And I think over the years, Shawn has taken so much from Bret and not given it back. And I think a lot of it is maybe he feels remorse for that night. But Bret is always ripping him apart. And Shawn, they did a Shawn and Bret sit down interview DVD, and I hate it because Bret just openly sitting next to Shawn Michaels is just talking bad about him, and Shawn just sits there and takes it like he's a bitch, and I just don't agree with that. I was always a Bret Hart guy more than a Shawn guy, but I've kind of definitely leaned towards more Shawn later in my later years. So yeah. During this time, they're going to put the sharpshooter on Bret. Shawn's going to put the sharpshooter on Bret. And what happens? Vince comes down, and he said, I wanted to be there. I wanted Bret to know that I did this. And so Bret says he sees Vince calling for the bell. He sees the timekeeper not wanting to ring it. And Vince is like, ring the bell. Ring the bell. And he's like, they did it. They screwed me. And the thing is, like, you can see it even at night. This broke Bret Hart. This moment, 1997, Survivor Series, this broke Bret Hart for the rest of his life. He's not over it now. Almost 30 years later, he's still not over it. I mean, I guess I can understand. Like, I've been with, broken up with girlfriends and stuff. This is a business. I don't know. He's still not over it, and it's just crazy how this has controlled his life since that night. Everything in life. We'll get a little bit more into it on the next episode. But after the event, Bret was destroying the monitors. He spit in Vince McMahon's face. He hit him right in the eye. That was pretty gross. Then they get back to the locker room and they show a couple scenes from Wrestling with Shadows where Bret's like, Shawn, you weren't in on that? And Shawn's like, no, God is my witness. I had nothing to do with that. And Vince came in the locker room and he said, look, I'm gonna let Bret hit me. He felt like he was owed that. And so here's where a little conflicting comes in, where Vince says he just walked up to him with his hands down by his side, let him hit him, and Bret hit him right in the temple. And Bret's saying, no, it was kind of a scuffle, and I kind of hit him with an uppercut. And he went like 4 feet back. He landed on his ankle. It was probably a mix of both. Vince went in, and the reason why Vince also, he doesn't say this, but now, and if Bret decides to try to sue him, Vince has a countersuit for the punch. They don't mention that, but that's probably why, It's a pretty historic moment. Kind of feel bad because right before this happens, you see Bret's son sitting next to him. And his kids had to be a part of all this, and that's what I feel for him. So, it's funny because afterwards, Vince comes out and he says, he hit me so hard, and I ended up with a pretty good concussion, which is so interesting. We'll get into that too in the future. That I'm gonna bring this up then when Vince says it was a pretty good concussion, and but Vince says, but I don't regret any of it. I don't have any regrets in my life, but when it comes to that, he says I don't regret it. And then they start the tease of, well, from this real life situation, now, Mr. McMahon is born, and they start to show a couple clips, and like, if you think the WWF is in trouble, au contraire, we're just getting started. They did the interview with the whole Bret screwed Brad. But this was, and you had to wonder, or I have to wonder, if the screw job never happened, does the Mr. McMahon character come out? No, it doesn't. And that's going to play into next episode because one of their biggest stars needed the Mr. McMahon character. And, you just have to wonder if Vince already had in mind what he was gonna do. They don't get into that, but you just have to wonder. So yeah, I think that it ends off pretty good. Now you're getting ready for the I think the next one is called Attitude. So it's pretty good. It's like I said, it's not a bad documentary. Again, I just think that like this episode is like one that wrestling fans are totally tired of hearing about. So, with that being said, I talked a little bit about the Beyond the Mat documentary, which that'll be reviewed at some point, because that was pretty good. That was pretty big at the time. But I want to take a Vince McMahon-ism from that. Like, all right, you think you can do it? There's one thing I want you to do. Can you get sick with me? He's gonna puke. 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 He's gonna puke.